For now, highlights of Premiership action between Liverpool and Manchester United in Match of the Day. First on BBC One, the main evening news and campaign report with Michael Buerk.
Europe's causing more trouble for the Tories. Sir Edward Heath called his party's attack on Tony Blair as Chancellor Kohl's puppet contemptible and immensely damaging. 1,000 Essex firefighters have walked out over budget cuts, and Manchester United have tightened their grip on the Premiership.
Here's Cole, and James didn't make it.
Good evening. The tensions in the Conservative Party over Europe have emerged again in the election campaign. The former Prime Minister, Sir Edward Heath, called yesterday's Tory advertisement showing Tony Blair as Chancellor Kohl's dummy unbelievable, abhorrent and contemptible. Today's Cabinet Ministers talked about Europe in strikingly different terms. The Home Secretary, Michael Howard, said Britain's survival as an independent nation-state would be at stake within weeks. The Chancellor, Kenneth Clarke, said seeing Europe as a threat was paranoid nonsense. Our chief political correspondent John Sargent reports.
The Tory Euro enthusiasts have decided to hit back at the way the Eurosceptics within the party have been making the running. At their head, not surprisingly, is the former Prime Minister, Sir Edward Heath. He's not been able to contain his anger at the Tory advertisement showing Tony Blair on Helmut Kohl's knee.
It was encouraging anti-German feeling in this country, much more than ridiculing Mr. Blair, which it didn't do. And it's also, of course, made the same effect on the other members of the European Union. How can we hope to influence them when they say this sort of thing happening? And so I believe it was absolutely contemptible.
The chief Euro enthusiasts in the Cabinet, Michael Heseltine and Kenneth Clarke, both defended the advertisement this morning. But Mr. Clarke went out of his way to deny any implication that Britain was threatened by Germany.
The European Union is not a threat. The leading European politicians are not a threat. We should leave that paranoid nonsense to the more extremist people in things like the referendum party.
But Mr. Clarke's benign view of the opportunity for Britain in Europe contrasted sharply with a dire warning from the Home Secretary a short time earlier.
Within weeks from today, at this European summit at Amsterdam, momentous decisions are going to be taken, and the very survival of Britain as an independent nation-state is going to be in question.
And this evening, the leading backbench Eurosceptic John Redwood relished the fact that so many of the party's candidates had come out against a single currency.
There is only one party in this general election that believes in an independent democratic Britain, that wants to stop the transfer of more powers at the Amsterdam conference. And there is only one party in Britain fielding so many candidates who've said unequivocally, unambiguously, we will not vote for a single currency.
John Major, who confined his campaigning to a little cricket today, faces a dilemma. He wants to highlight the importance of the Europe issue and take the attack to Labour, but he risks putting the spotlight on his own party's divisions. Opposition politicians had no such qualms.
The divisions within the Conservative Party are now wholly out in the open. We have two factions briefing and fighting against each other, and we have a leader of the Conservative Party who has made leadership the issue, but has actually lost control of the party.
They are no longer a single river of political unity. They are a different set of streams and tributaries running only into the sand.
With 11 days of campaigning to go, the Tories are desperate to take the initiative. In their plans, they've penciled in a couple of these days to concentrate on their differences with Labour over Europe. But now they've got to decide whether they should try to drop the subject altogether. John Sargent, BBC News, Westminster.
Labour has spent the day focusing its campaign on pensioners, with a promise to increase the state pension in line with inflation. The Labour leader, Tony Blair, accused the Conservatives of planning to privatise the state pension. Our political correspondent Carole Walker is following the Blair campaign.
For once, the emphasis was not on the fresh, new face of the Labour Party. Tony Blair paid tribute to the vision of Labour governments of the past, which created the National Health Service and built up the welfare state. He warned his audience their pensions were not safe with the Tories.
You can only be sure with them, they say. Well, one thing you can be sure of with them. If they get back in, privatising the state pension is what they intend to do. And we are going to stop them.
Labour's manifesto for pensioners pledges a cut in VAT on fuel from 8 to 5%, shorter hospital waiting lists and an end to the sell-off of residential care homes.
We do promise to make a difference, to make a change for the better. The basic state pension will stay and will be uprated at least in line with prices. It will remain as a building block of security in retirement under Labour.
The Labour Party say that what the Tories have claimed as their big idea to shake up the entire pension system is proving deeply unpopular and is helping them to win over pensioners, particularly women who stayed loyal to the Conservatives in the past. But the Social Security Secretary, out campaigning today, said the government had guaranteed the state pension and his plans would increase its value in the long term.
Tony Blair seems to be resorting to increasingly hysterical scaremongering tactics, first over the health service, now over pensions. People simply can't trust someone who says simultaneously he'll do exactly the same as us, and then says that he's offering something more without offering any more money to back up his promises.
What we're suggesting is that we'd give a top-up to the basic state pension, which would be linked to earnings. Now, that will help the poorest pensioners. Labour's not suggesting that.
Pensioner pressure groups are sceptical of all the rival claims.
Nobody's found a way of committing themselves to give pensioners the minimum level of a state pension or a combination at the moment that will guarantee dignity in later life.
Tony Blair has no big spending plans to help pensioners, but his team points to his determination to brush aside the Tories' personal attacks and continue to campaign on what he believes are the issues that matter to voters. Carole Walker, BBC News, North London.
Council officials in Essex have warned striking firefighters they'll be suspended if their action continues after Wednesday. The fire officers are now halfway through a 24-hour strike over cuts in the service. Army Green Goddesses have provided cover for the area, but so far there have been no major emergencies. Our industry correspondent John Fryer reports.
Firefighters marched out defiantly all across Essex as the strike was solidly supported. Though the County Council maintains no stations will be closed, the union says budget cuts will jeopardise services. Their action was justified, even though they've become embroiled in the election campaign.
Well, I'm not a political animal at all. I'd sooner be working. But at the end of the day, you have to say enough is enough.
All I'm interested in is the safety of my job and the people of Essex.
The firefighters took their campaign onto the streets of Basildon as the Tories said it confirmed the need for new curbs on strikes in essential services and Labour condemned the walkouts. Essex County Council said there was no need for a strike.
It's unnecessary and it's irresponsible. There are no redundancies proposed by the County Council, no fire station closures proposed by the County Council, no fire appliance being taken off the run.
But it was a quiet day and the Army Green Goddess appliances on emergency standby weren't busy. In terms of political advantage, this dispute's not straightforward. It does highlight strikes in essential services, but it also puts a focus on current tight levels of public spending, set by the Tories, but which Labour says won't change if it wins the election. John Fryer, BBC News, Basildon.
A man has appeared before magistrates in London accused of conspiracy to cause the Docklands bombing in February last year. James McArdle was also charged with murder. Another man charged last summer over the bombing is awaiting trial. George Eykyn reports.
As usual in terrorist-related cases, armed police escorted the defendant to court from Paddington Green Police Station, where he's been questioned by Scotland Yard's anti-terrorist branch. A helicopter kept guard overhead as 29-year-old James McArdle was led in to the specially built magistrates' court, which adjoins Belmarsh Prison. The hearing lasted almost an hour. James McArdle has no fixed address, but comes originally from Crossmaglen in South Armagh, near the border with the Irish Republic. Two plainclothes policemen sat either side of him as he appeared casually dressed in the dock. He's charged with conspiring to cause an explosion likely to endanger life and with murdering Inan ul-Haq Bashir and John Jeffries, who both died in the Docklands bombing which ended the IRA ceasefire. He denies the charges. Mr. McArdle was arrested with several other men at a farmhouse during a security operation in South Armagh. He was questioned in Northern Ireland and on his release re-arrested and flown to London. 2 men died in the IRA Docklands bombing and scores of people were injured. One man, Patrick McKinley from South Armagh, is already awaiting trial in connection with the bomb attack. His trial's due to start on Monday. George Eykyn, BBC News, Belmarsh.
The IRA has said it was responsible for yesterday's bomb attack and the security alerts, which caused severe disruption to road and rail links in the Midlands and north of England. Services on the 2 main north-south railway lines were suspended after an explosion outside Leeds station, and the M6 motorway was closed over 3 counties. Aid agencies say conditions are worse. And here's Peter Snow with the details.
Well, the Tories are still stuck fast, and Labour's lead, although it does continue its slow decline, is still a very commanding one. Take tonight's 2 polls first. NOP in tomorrow's Sunday Times puts Labour on 45, down 3 from last Sunday, the Conservatives on 31, up 3, and the Liberal Democrats unchanged on 17. Gallup in tomorrow's Sunday Telegraph has Labour and the Tories pretty steady over the last few days at 50 and 31, with the Liberal Democrats up 1 at 13. Now, set in the context of the campaign so far, Labour's support began 4 weeks ago in the mid-50s, up the top left there, but slowly over the 27 polls so far, declining to the high 40s over here. The red shading there shows the range of Labour's support in each period of the campaign, and there's the broad average of Labour's trend, perhaps now 7 or 8 points lower than it began. The Tories starting just below 30, and tonight ending just above it. Their range throughout showing them within 3 points of 31% throughout. Any slight movement in that trend line is really negligible when you bear in mind the sampling error of 3% up or down all the way along. And the Liberal Democrats edging up as Labour has edged down. The gold dots climbing up there from around 10 at the start to the mid-teens now. There's how Mr. Ashdown's party has ranged from stage to stage of the campaign, and the trend, on average, is clearly up, though not yet quite scoring the 18% they managed at the last general election. And just to give you a measure of the change all this represents, in the 1992 election, the Tories had a lead of nearly 8% in the share of the vote. At the beginning of this election campaign, NOP, Gallup and Harris, the 3 regular polls whose latest figures we now have tonight, registered leads for Labour of 25, 28 and 27. At the end of this week, tonight, these Labour leads have dropped to 14, 19 and 18. Now that's a drop of around a third or more from the beginning. At that rate of decline, assuming Labour were to go on dropping, it would take another 8 weeks for the 2 parties to be neck and neck. And there are less than 2 weeks now to polling day. So, just supposing things don't change in the next 12 days, just for illustration, and the pattern of voting reflected what the polls are now reporting, what would happen? Well, here is the BBC's battleground, the key seats, all blue for Conservative in 1992, and the lower the column of blue for each seat, the smaller the Conservative majority last time. This is, if you like, the ladder that the opposition parties have to climb up to win. Starting over on the left here with the easiest seats for Labour to turn red, gold for the Liberal Democrats, yellow and green for the Nationalists. Now, Labour has to reach well into this third column, 57 net gains up to and beyond where Loughborough is here for victory. Now, here's how the latest polls suggest that the political colour of our battleground would change if there's a uniform swing throughout. Labour making gains, as you can see, way beyond the third column, and the Liberal Democrats too, and the Scottish National Party, way beyond that third column, and way beyond that as well. They'd be in, Labour, with a majority of around 150. And once again, the only real encouragement for the Tories, if the polls are accurately reflecting public opinion, is what people are saying about the economy. Asked by NOP which party would best manage the economy, people gave Labour the lead last week by just 1%. Whereas tonight, people put the Tories 5% ahead on the issue that many believe decided the last election. Gallup tonight also has the Tories scoring better than Labour on inflation and on strikes and industrial relations. But of course, the issue that has grabbed the headlines in the past 3 days has been Europe. And tonight's two polls were able to ask people about the effect of all the shenanigans. Asked by Gallup, for example, who they'd now trust more to negotiate in Britain's interest in Europe, 42% of people plumped for John Major, 45% for Tony Blair. And how's Mr. Major's handling of the debate affected people's inclination to vote Conservative? Well, 8% now say they're more likely to vote Conservative, but 19% say they're less likely to vote Conservative, with the other 65% saying it'll make no difference. And interestingly, of those who've not yet decided how to vote, 1/5 say that Mr. Major's handling of Europe has made it less likely they'll support him. None of them say it's made them more likely to. So Europe looks unlikely to rescue the Tories, who are still further behind in the opinion polls than any government's been in an election campaign since the war, Michael.
And the main election news tonight, Sir Edward Heath has weighed into the debate over Europe. He said the Conservative attack on Tony Blair as Chancellor Cole's puppet was abhorrent and contemptible. Well, I'm joined now from Westminster by our chief political correspondent, John Sargent. John, how much trouble are the Tories really in over Europe?
Well, I think the trouble is that, at the very least, they're giving a very confusing message over Europe. I think lots of people know that the Tories are divided, but when they're trying to work out what their policy would be on a single currency, I think many people in the middle simply are confused. And when they're told that by Mr. Major, the official line is that the option is being kept open on a single currency, they accept that point. Then they're told that there are scores and scores, nearly perhaps 200 Tory candidates who are opposed to a single currency. It just makes it very difficult for the party to campaign on Europe.
One way or another, though, the Tories seem to be setting the agenda. Are the opposition parties concerned about this, or do they think it's working to their advantage?
Well, I think there is concern because, of course, what's happened for great chunks of the election campaign is in terms of the news stories, whether it's overseas or Europe, the Tories in that narrow sense have had an advantage. And it's been harder for the other opposition parties, Labour and the Liberal Democrats and the other parties, to make their own initiative in terms of the news stories. So from that point of view, they do feel a bit squeezed out.
John Sargent, thanks very much indeed. And that's all from the BBC Newsroom tonight. Good night.
Good evening. First rain for about 4